For today's mini grammar lesson, we're going to talk about the passive voice, something we're not encouraged to use a lot in English, but it's actually more common in Spanish, especially in formal writing. So a brief definition. In Spanish or English, you can express an action as a passive construction or as an active construction. Here's an example of an active construction. Botero pintó un retrato del general. He painted a portrait of the general. I could also express that as a passive action, where Botero becomes less important, the agent, and now what's more important is the object that was painted and the action of painting. El retrato del general fue pintado por Botero. Now there's our agent, there's the person who did it, but in this case, as a passive construction, it's not nearly as important. There's also another way, we'll see in a minute, where it's se pintó un retrato del general, where the agent is eliminated altogether. What matters now is that a painting was painted, not who did it. Okay, active constructions emphasize the agent, the person or thing who carries out the action. Passive constructions emphasize the action. Okay, oops, more than the agent. Let's look at a couple of different ways to form this. The most common way, although not the most useful way in speech, is where you're dealing with the verb ser. And we're going to use the verb ser with the past participle. Remember, the past participle is formed by ado or ido, and then we have rev, mac, phd, which are the irregulars. Okay, and so we're going to form this. The participle matches gender and number with the noun that's receiving the action. Let's look at some active and some passive. Here's some active examples. Juanita abrió la puerta. Jane opened the door. Piece of cake. In a passive construction, now we're going to see that the door was opened by Jane. What matters is not who opened the door, rather that it was opened. Quiroga envió las cartas fueron enviadas. Now notice how enviadas has to match cartas, fueron has to match cartas. This is where things are going to change a little bit, because envió matches Quiroga. But now the cartas have become the subject of the sentence, and the participle has to match. Mis tíos abrirán, future tense here, una pastelería el mes que viene. Una pastelería será abierta. In the second case, we don't care that it belongs to my uncles or my aunts. What matters is now it will be open next month. The pastry shop is more important than the agent. La maestra vendió los libros. Los libros fueron vendidos. Again, doesn't matter who sold, rather that they were sold. Now, here's some examples. And I'm going to let you read them quickly. We'll look at the first one. El artista pintó el mural. El mural fue pintado por el artista. Mi papá comprará un carro nuevo. El carro nuevo será comprado por mi papá. You can refer to the website or the PowerPoint to see more examples here of how we could create something, an active construction where the agent matters, and a passive construction where the item or the action matters. There's a second way to form the passive voice in Spanish. You can use the pronombre se before the singular or plural third-person verb of any transitive verb. Here's some examples. Se habla español. It doesn't matter who speaks Spanish. We just know that Spanish is spoken here. We see this a lot outside of stores. Se cerraron las tiendas. The stores were closed. Who closed them? Somebody did. Doesn't really matter. What we care about is that the stores were closed. This is a funny example. Se me cayó el tenedor. The fork dropped itself. To me. I'm the victim. Okay, but I'm not saying that I dropped the fork. I'm saying that the fork was dropped, and I was the person to whom it was dropped. Sometimes we can say this is an impersonal way. Se vive bien en el campo. Se despidió a los obreros perezosos. In this case, we're not really referring to obreros. We're referring to the impersonal idea of somebody or one or they or something else. We can go into this in a little bit more detail later. Okay, so here's some examples. Ellos estudian español, se estudia español. Ellos pintaron las puertas, se pintaron las puertas. The doors were painted. Now I could have said las puertas fueron pintadas, but in oral speech, the se is actually much more common. Okay, now on the next two slides, I have some practices that you can do. Let's do one example of each. La secretaria copia el contrato. The correct answer would be el contrato fue copiado por la secretaria. Okay, you can do these on your own when you have time. Practica con se. Ellos compraron el helado. Se compró el helado. All right, passive voice.